everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Flesh and Blood and Bone podcast. I'm Kyra. I'm here with my dad, Tony.
I'm Tony.
That's Tony. And today I am dressed like my dead mother from the Blob. For those of you listening at home, she's a cheerleader, like very briefly in the beginning of the movie. You can spot her. And then she dies later on in the movie theater scene. So I have dressed like my dead mother for you today.
And it's very beautiful.
Thank you. I wanted to get some popcorn and put it on my face, which we'll talk about later of like why that scene is so iconic in this household. But today we're going to talk about The Blob. The Blob was my dad's first movie as his own special effects company. He was no longer working under somebody.
Right.
So you did Return of the Living Dead and some other stuff. What led you, to like make your own SFX shop, and then how did the job for The Blob come about?
All right. Well, I did a lot of freelance work on the side while I was working for other people, Rick Baker, Stan Winston, Greg Canham, on different shows. And I would moonlight, or if there was downtime, I would do other stuff. There was a period where there was not much going on, and Greg Canham was actually going to do The Blob, and there were a couple other people, or there were a couple other effects that they wanted to talk to people about doing that were sort of like ancillary to the main story. So I went in originally interviewing to do like 2 or 3 smaller things for it, met Chuck Russell and had a great interview. And when the show started, for like a brief moment, I was going to do those secondary effects, and Greg was going to do the bulk of the show. And then he had a conflict with something else. He had to bow out. They asked me to take over what he was going to do, and then asked me to help find somebody to replace me on the other stuff. And I said, well, this is all The Blob, and it should all be cohesive. If I find those other people to do that stuff, it seems like it would be great if we all worked in the same shop. And then if they're going to be in the same building so that it all looks the same, I might as well supervise all of it. And that's kind of how it played out.
That's how Alterian started?
Well, that's not really how Alterian came to be, like a couple years later, but this is how...
This is the baby.
This is the launch of being my own company, because I always said I didn't want to do it. I liked working for other people and didn't like the responsibility and the figuring out how everything fits together and hitting deadlines and all that. I enjoyed, but ultimately it was nice being a part of the machine instead of the responsible party. So to step up and be in charge of like 20-some people and this budget all of a sudden was a bit overwhelming, but I tried to go in super organized. Put me they rented a big warehouse right off of Hollywood Boulevard on what was Hudson Street. It's now a nightclub.
Oh, do you know the name of the nightclub?
I do not.
We'll find it out later.
But they rented this big building, and they had Lyle Conway's Creature Shop on one side, which was the Blob proper. And then they had the makeup effects shop on the other side, which was me. And we actually toyed around with a whole bunch of names, and one of the artists, Mike Smithson, we decided since everybody was all drippy and goopy, it looked like a bad acid trip. So for a brief moment, we were called Clowns on Acid.
Oh, I like that.
And we were COA Effects Group, and we made a logo. Mike drew it up, and it was a fat clown in a weird inner tube inflatable animal, sort of like the ILM logo, just sort of messed up.
Oh, like this? Like this logo right here?
It looked exactly like that, signed by the same person, Mike Smithson.
Wow. My dad found a bunch of old stuff in a bin the other day, and I went through it.
I forgot, yeah. So that was a riff on the ILM logo, and then that was going to be our crew shirt. And by the time we got into it, we were so busy, and we had, we lost track of the ability to have extracurricular things go down like that. We never did shirts. We did like Letterman's jackets instead.
Oh, that's cooler.
Since Donovan Leitch's character was
a jock.
Yeah. So we did Letterman jackets with the year and a little bit of melting on the year.
Where's your go? Where is yours?
I don't know.
That's disappointing.
I know.
Sad day.
It would be very cool.
Speaking of budgets, Did you know that in all this work that you gave, this box of things that my dad gave me is your original budget breakdown from 1988?
No, let me see.
This piece of paper is from 1988, ladies and gentlemen, and they, thems.
April 4th, 1988, to Rupert Harvey, Chris Cole, and Daryl Cass. Original bid.
Yes, it talks about...
Revised bid, approved additions.
Are we allowed to divulge what the SFX budget was?
Sure, I don't care.
Okay. Well, because I never know if it's a no-no in film.
My actual budget is $466,441.25. And 25 cents. I was apparently very, very, very specific.
That's good. That's probably why they hired you. Yeah, that was in here. I don't know if you...
That's amazing. And then there's a list of all the makeup effects.
Yes, I was going through this list of all the makeup effects that my dad was asked to do, and that's quite a laundry list of effects, I must say.
And then we took on more because once Lyle left the show, we took on the blob element wherever it overlapped a person. And we shot Donovan Leach's thing last because...
You needed more time.
My idea was that's the first time you see it, and I want to make sure it's good.
That's true.
So... let's have a little bit of a learning curve, figure it out. If we shoot that last, it'll be killer because we'll know what we're doing. And by the time we got to that, our side of the shop literally did the whole thing, built the blob and
oh my God,
all that. And then another company did the miniatures for part of the scene is a miniature. We spent a couple days shooting it at the very end, that one particular scene and a bunch of inserts.
So it's two shops basically.
Under one roof.
With
literally almost a line
down the middle.
Down the floor.
That's nuts. The Blob is a remake.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the original, and what were you nervous going into like remaking such a big thing?
I wasn't nervous going into remaking it at all because it was jelly in the
valid.
In the 1950s one. It's like, well, no matter what we do, I think we'll be better than that.
Yeah.
Even if we have a jelly hand puppet, it'll still do more. So my whole thing was trying to figure out how to make the deaths interesting and figure out what this organism was and how it worked. And I did an interview with Fangoria magazine, and I was trying to describe it as sort of the idea of a stomach, but flipped inside out.
Oh, that's great.
So the acid and the dissolving aspect of it was on the exterior. So if it touched you, you burned and you smoked.
I see.
And you started to dissolve. But at the same time, it could absorb you and you could like float around in there in its stomach in what it is in entirety and be continuing to dissolve.
I see.
So that was the idea. And I think the Fangoria interview said something like, it's an inside-out vampire stomach.
Where'd the vampire come from?
Because I was saying it would dissolve
blood. Oh, I see.
And that's where it would get its color.
Oh.
And then it would ignore things like hair and bone and stuff that it couldn't eat, basically.
Oh, I see.
And that stuff would still be kind of like rolling around in there. And there was actually a scene that we built all the puppets for a big water tank thing, with like these skeleton puppets floating by outside.
You know what's crazy?
What?
As I found that footage today, your test footage of that.
Really?
In the pool, and I had no fucking idea what it was because I was like, where is this in the movie?
Yeah. The water tank cracked.
Oh.
The day we were supposed to shoot. No chance to fix it, so we didn't.
You axed it. So there was supposed to be a scene with like water tank puppets.
Yeah, it was. We had done
elements.
Yeah, we had done a water tank for when Candy Clark's in the phone booth and the sheriff goes by in the blob. That was the first idea of somebody dissolving and their face distending as they went by, and the tendrils of flesh running behind them.
Tendrils.
And then when you get to Kevin Dillon in the truck cab, when the blob goes over it and he's trapped, the truck is upside down. Through the windshield, you're supposed to see Dr. Bellows go by. And he was all stretched out, kind of like the sheriff, because he'd been recently
killed.
Eaten. And then we had this really cool, weird skeleton that was sort of like distended and translucent and pearlescent with a really long jaw, and it goes floating by in the other direction. And that was supposed to be somebody that had been in there longer.
Oh my God.
That was the idea.
That's really complicated.
So we had these two bodies floating by.
But it didn't work out because of the water tank cracking.
Yeah, it cracked, and they were like, we don't have time. So.
Or, money to
Yeah, so we
That
carried
makes
those puppets
sense.
around for, I don't know, a couple decades, and
Oh,
they rotted away.
oh, great. Not
Yeah.
long enough for me to see them?
No,
Thanks,
but
Dad.
really cool stuff.
Amazing. And you're how old at this point? 1988?
I was 24, and they were like, "Can you handle a crew full of people?" I'm like,
No.
"I
Yes.
was kind of supervising people at other shops, so sure."
Dang, just jumping right into it.
And I had people that were 18, and I had people that were in what I thought was ancient at the time, in their like 40s. And everybody was literally, though, like, it was like one big peer group. We all were the same mind and really enjoyed doing this. We're all fans and we're having fun.
Yeah, I would say a lot of fun. I'll put some in the video of this. Probably have them in the scans. I've scanned a lot of BTS photos from the Blob of my dad's. But my dad's shop would have like Vampire Day or Cowboy Day. So there's all these old photos of like my dad and this SFX artist friend of ours, Bill Corso, who's working for you, I think, at the time.
No, he was working on Lyle's side.
Just kidding.
That's
He's
where I
on
met him.
Lyle's style. Oh!
Bill actually did a lot of the development, the R&D for the Blob and how it moved, and did some really cool stuff with acrylic balls on inside spandex painted with veins with methicillin there, and
Very rad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bill Corso does the SFX for like Deadpool and Indiana Jones with George.
Anything with Harrison Ford.
Yeah. So Bill was on that side, but clearly he
Yeah.
was a fan of y'all's side of the shop because he's in all those photos dressed up as
Yeah.
cowboys and vampires.
Our side, it started out really simple, just trying to like keep everybody excited and happy. And it was like, remember in high school you had like Spirit Week?
Yes.
It's like, well, let's have Spirit Day. And it started out really simple, and it was like, we'll do tie day. Everybody
Okay.
wears a tie, and if you didn't have a tie, you made a tie out of tape. Or
I love
whatever.
that.
And then it turned into Black and White Day, and then it got more complicated, and then it turned into Vampire Day. But people, because it was Makeup Effects crew, and we were a bunch of kids, and we were free to do what we wanted to do.
We want to be free. Yeah. We want to be free to do what we want to do. Yeah. We want to get loaded. Yeah. And we want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do.
People wore fangs and contact lenses to work and did their work, like
Rad.
in capes and all this stuff, like all day. And then we had Cowboy Day, and we had everybody renting. People were renting costumes from Western Costume with like chaps.
Oh my God.
And stuff, and we took sisal fiber that you make molds with, and people were making tumbleweeds and painting the tentacle molds green like cactuses and setting those up around the shop and building like picket fences, and we really got into it, but it really made the whole experience
More fun.
super fun. And then a bunch of the guys on Lyle's side got involved as well, and that just made it more fun and made it like more inclusive. And anytime we had a effect where the stuff overlapped, we were able to work with them more. But most of the time they were building stuff that would work on like the miniature sets and stuff like that was separate from like the can man's hand dissolving or makeup effects that we were doing.
Yeah. If you have not watched the 1988 Blob, you should go watch it. If you don't want to watch it and want to understand what the hell we're saying, I'm going to pass it over to my other self to do a quick recap, and then you can come back to us.
If you don't want to hear the recap, you can forward to around 20 minutes into the podcast. We begin in a small town where a local high school football game is going on. Here we meet football player Paul, who has a crush on cheerleader Meg. Paul's friend Scott convinces him to ask her out. Meanwhile, Kevin Dillon's character Brian is at a small dry trench with a broken bridge, which he's trying to jump with his motorcycle. He jumps and crashes while a local forest man, the Can Man, applauds him on his failure from the bushes. Meanwhile, we meet Sheriff Herb Geller at Fran's diner, where he and Fran chat, and she slyly asks him out for a date later that evening. Upon leaving, he spots Brian, and it's clear the two don't like each other. Brian goes into work at the mechanic shop to get tools to fix his bike, and we learn his boss is trying to fix the snowmaker. Later that evening, a meteor hits the forest, and the Can Man goes to investigate the crash site. He discovers a gooey substance in the rock and pokes it with a stick. It moves and climbs up to the stick and onto his hand. Meanwhile, Meg gets ready for her date as her little brother Kevin and his friend Manny head out to the movies. Paul arrives and picks up Meg. Meanwhile, in the forest, Brian discovers the Can Man running around with the now Blob on his hand. Brian tries to catch him, but he runs away and right smack dab into Paul's car. Paul, Meg and Brian take the can man to the hospital. While they wait, Brian knows he'll be blamed for the homeless man's condition and bails. Paul goes to get Meg a soda and spots the homeless man in a room. He approaches and the old man's throat bulges and his eyes go white. Paul runs for the doctor and the two discover the man's entire bottom half has disintegrated. Paul rushes to the phone to call the cops. While on the phone, parts of the blob begin to drip onto the table. He screams and Meg rushes to discover him completely encapsulated by the monster. Paul becomes a human flesh popsicle as Meg grabs his hand, which eventually rips off with the grossest sound effects playing underneath that. She passes out while his arm's still twitching. Meg's parents take her from the hospital in shock. And of course, in any 80s horror movie trope, the adults assume that a person had to be responsible for somehow disintegrating bodies in seconds and pin it on the emotionally unavailable heartthrob bad boy who owns a motorcycle. Naturally. Meanwhile, the huge piece of shit Scott is trying to get some in the car with this chick Vicky who had way too many coolers. Unbeknownst to him, the blob has already targeted its next victim. Scott, again being a huge piece of shit, tries to go to first base with a now passed out Vicky. Karma quickly gets his ass as Vicky turns into an imploded Barbie doll and tentacles shoot out of her and onto Scott. They obviously both die. Meanwhile, Meg's mom tries to tell her to just let it go that she just saw her crush get turned inside out and just sleep it off with some drugs. Is it melatonin? Is it Xanax? We don't know. We love the 80s. Meg doesn't take them and instead sneaks out of her house in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, Brian is in custody and the sheriffs naturally don't listen to anything he says. The sheriff manhandles him and gets in his face, and as soon as my brain shouted for them to kiss, Brian licks the sheriff's face in a weird power move that I'm honestly here for. The sheriff with actual brains determines Brian isn't responsible and they let him go, just in time for him to cross paths with Meg. Tired and hungry, they head to Fran's diner and she offers to whip him up a sandwich. Meg follows him in. They chat about being teenagers who come from different walks of the hallway but are ultimately similar. Meanwhile, Fran goes to clear the dishes in the sink, which leads us to another pinnacle of the movie's SFX. She attempts a plunger, but something is stuck deeper in the sink. The dishwasher George tries, and it's still plugged. So he sticks his hand down in there, naturally. He picks out remnants of the blob, which suddenly shoots out of the sink, grabbing him by the face and pulling him into the sink drain. Fran walks in and screams while the rest of his body goes through the blob's garbage disposal in one bloody, crunchy swoop. It then shoots out, having grown larger, and Meg and Brian make a run for it into the nearby freezer. The blob attempts to come through the crack in the door, but oddly stops. Fran runs to a local phone booth and tries to call the sheriff. Meanwhile, the blob found its new target and starts enveloping the entire booth with Fran inside. Here we learn where the sheriff has been this whole time. Inside the blob. The force becomes too great and ruptures the whole glass booth, taking Fran with it. Meg and Brian leave. Meanwhile, the Reverend is for some reason nearby and spots the blob, and of course has something super reverendy to say. He investigates the diner and, like a true dum-dum, puts pieces of what looks like infected glass into a jar that was conveniently nearby. Meg and Brian look for the sheriff and discover his car off to the side of the road. Meg and Brian enter the forest, where spooky lights shine from overhead, which reveal a crazy chopper and like 30 guys dressed as White Among Us characters out of nowhere. They're there to help and reveal they are agents of the government for biological containment. They reveal to Meg that there was a meteor that caused some crazy shit. The doctor gives an interesting spiel on how something like the blob may have been the thing to wipe out the dinosaurs. Meanwhile, Meg's little brother and friend are watching a non-copyrighted knockoff of Friday the 13th at the movie theater where shit is about to go down. 2 movie theater employees are the next victim of the blob as it makes its way into the theater. Meanwhile, Brian shows us he is anti-Big Pharma, but they don't care and tell him to get in their van while they search the city for signs of infection. Brian makes a jump for it while Meg stays in the back of the van into the city to make sure her family is okay. She gets ushered into the White House-looking town hall building where she spots her parents. The little boys are still at the movies and Meg runs to go find them. The blob starts taking people in masses since its size has now tripled, one of the victims being my mom, who dies on the movie theater carpet. R.I.P. Mom. Through the chaos, Meg is able to find the boys, and we get this amazing shot of the blob pummeling over the movie theater seats. The trio run through the back alley into their only option, which is the sewer. Meanwhile, Brian is on his bad boy shit with his motorcycle and stalking the sanitized-looking astronauts who are in a conflict of science versus morality. We learn that the main doctor doesn't care about the townspeople in the name of protecting the spread past the town. Brian runs from the man and hops on his magically fixed motorcycle, now having to face the bridge he couldn't jump in the beginning of the movie. Like a hottie, he jumps it while somehow dodging bullets because these doctors really open-fired on a teenager. He loses them. Back in the sewer, Meg is having her rat girl summer trying to find an exit with the boys. Meanwhile, the blob has appeared on their tails. Meg rushes them to the ladder, but Manny gets yeeted backwards and into the sewer water. Meg searches but can't find him before a half-melted version pops back up. I personally think it's so cool this movie killed a kid before killing kids in horror was more mainstream. The remaining 2 try to escape as some doctors arrive and start shooting at the blob. It retreats and Kevin escapes, but Meg is too big for the hole. She finds a different opening transitioning to a different part of the sewer tunnels where somehow McHottie Brian just so happens to be with his whole ass motorcycle in there. They drive through the tunnels on Brian's motorcycle until they hit a dead end with the Blob shortly in pursuit. He puts the motorcycle in X Games mode and twists around it before they both are kicked off of it. They eventually make their way to an exit, but the big bad doctor says to seal it up. The two make it out, but the other doctor was too deep in existential dread to make it out. All the boys now have a power struggle with their little guns. Brian gets his monologue moment and reveals that the meteor was man-made and a fucked up test of war. The doctor tries to go to shoot him, but the Blob gets his ass first, and we're honestly okay with that. And the ultimate rock, paper, scissors, guns don't beat Blob, and it gets pissed, shooting out of the sewer with the biggest tentacle we've ever seen. Not 1 ounce of production value is wasted here as we get explosions, tentacles taking entire people catching on fire. It's all madness. Meg, may I point out being the only woman in this fight, figures out the Blob can't stand the cold as she attempts to put out flames with a fire extinguisher. Brian gets the snowmaker from his work and plows into the streets. Brian aims the snowmaker at the Blob, which flips the car over like it's nothing. Meg grabs a gun and shoots at the Blob, distracting it from getting Brian, looking like a total badass. In a not badass turn of events, she gets stuck to the side of the car. Brian manages to free himself and her before the Blob covers the truck and the snow machine blows up. A la Edward Scissorhands, it now starts to snow and the two hug. The town members come out to see the destroyed Blob, and it's happily ever after. Or is it? The Reverend, who's looking halfway to Freddy Krueger, holds a sermon and reveals to us his jar of the Blob he's held onto like a true idiot, setting us up perfectly for a sequel, which we will never get because this was 1988 and there hasn't been one. And that's what you missed on The Blob.
In reading your budget for this movie, your guys' start was at the beginning of 88 and the movie came out still in 88. That's an insane turnaround time.
It all happened in 88.
That's crazy.
We did the interview, took on the show, the job grew, shot everything, and then we went back for like a day and a half of inserts on like May 26th of 88. Finished, worked all night. Finished May 27th in the morning.
How do you remember that?
I left because I had to drive to San Diego.
Why?
Because I was getting married.
Oh!
They were still shooting when I left.
Wow.
And then the film came out in August.
Wow. So
the same year. So it was a crazy
turnaround. Year. Your first big job
Yeah.
as your kind of shop, and then you get married. Well, first of all, you kill your bride, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because my mother
Fiance
does
at
die.
the time.
Fiance.
Yeah.
Tell my fiancé I'm looking for him. I have lost my fiancé, the poor baby.
Tell your fiance.
And then you marry her later that year, and then the movie comes out.
Yeah. Crazy.
How long was your pre-production then?
We had a couple months.
Okay, a few months. That's still a lot to do.
Yeah, but we had time to like sculpt a bunch of stuff. Bill Sturgeon sculpted a really nice maquette of Donovan's character, Paul, getting dragged backwards. Just a little tiny sculpture.
What's a maquette?
Maquette is like a miniature version of what you want to do full size.
Oh.
So we did like a little Donovan Leitch about this tall, but he was
Cute.
in the Blob already, and the Blob was going out a window. And it was just foam core base and a foam core back with a window
I think
cut
I
out.
have this.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, action. Cut. And then he sculpted it all in oil-based clay. And that sort of gave us the proportions for the whole effect, because we wanted to see the Blob going over the windowsill and see movement behind, but we also wanted to see movement over the face of the guy and movement backwards.
Damn, that's a lot of movement.
Yeah, so we cut it in half and we figured out how we'd shoot it and what angles would work. If you look at behind the scenes, we were very specific with where the frame ended, and we knew where it had to end because we had to be right there holding.
In some of the footage that I found this morning, there's some takes of Shawnee when she's ripping Donovan's arm off. And in one of the angles, they're too wide for it's just the gag in that shot is just the arm rip, and they're a bit too wide. And she wasn't pulling hard enough or something, and so you can see somebody else's hand right there on the edge of the frame. And I was like, I see. That's why they went tighter and moved the camera angle a little bit. Yeah.
It would have been nice to have storyboarded it. I mean, we kind of demand that. No.
Oh my God.
No. So that's what I mean. We were shooting video tests in the shop and sharing them, saying, this is what we're doing and this is how it works.
Wow.
And trust us that we're giving you the best angle to make it work.
Yeah.
We've built it to work this way. And we were trusted.
That's good, because like this is my main thing of like why I want to direct SFX stuff, is because I listen to my dad all the time being like, this is the best angle, this is, you know, cut in and then cut out of it. It doesn't matter how much money you spent on the thing, get in and get out, and that's what sells the gag. And so time and time again, you know, people just ignore it these days, I feel. They're like, oh.
Well, they want to show cool stuff, and it's like, does it further the story or does it stop the story?
Yes, which is a very good point.
And a lot of times it stops the story. It's like doing a magic trick. It only works from one angle.
That's very true. I went to the Magic Castle the other day. This guy turned a bunch of puffballs into baby chickens.
That's cool.
And I cried. It was very cool. But yeah, if you're sitting anywhere else.
Yeah, it's designed to work a specific way. So
yeah.
You make sure your audience is there, and if you're on screen, you make sure the camera is there so that you're not giving away
the gag.
The gag.
Speaking of,
but now you could do it digital. You could we could be in the frame, and
then they just
be erased, because that's what we do with Chucky.
Yeah.
But back then,
that wasn't an option.
No, they could do compositing, and that was really it.
But it's so good that way.
It's just raw. It's real.
It's rarer.
Raw.
It's rarer.
Hear the roar.
Speaking of design, this is literally a monster to design. Like, were there things that you tried and it didn't work out? Like, what is the Blob made out of? And I know there's different versions. So like,
he, she, it,
they, the Blob, Little Miss Blob.
The Blob was basically whatever worked best for the shot that we were trying to do. The idea of it, and what Bill Corso did that was the coolest, was he did this silk bag. It was Chinese silk, and if you paint veins on it and get the silk wet, the fabric goes away. So it just looks like veins.
Like clear, translucent Chinese silk?
So imagine making like a big, loose, like beanbag sort of thing that has veins painted on it. And instead of putting beans in it, you injected it with slime. So it's full of goo. So the goo soaks through to the surface and obliterates the fabric.
I see.
So it's veins floating on this goo. And then they had put a bunch of acrylic balls inside it to hold mass to it.
Oh.
And like Bill tried rolling it down like an incline, and if you shot it with the camera at an angle, it was this cool thing.
That's like folding over itself.
And they never used that in the movie, but that was sort of the launch of how it could move, because that looked super organic, because it was.
That's rad.
So that was sort of the main direction, but like the projectionist that's caught up in the ceiling.
Yeah.
You're seeing him after he's been blobbed. So the idea was, let's sculpt it all so he looks like his weight is stretching down through the blob, and it's more skin. So that was a big sculpted foam latex body.
Jesus Christ.
But we put a hole where the hand would be. We had a real guy's hand in there because he was playing with a yo-yo. We thought it'd be funny if the hand was still able to do a yo-yo. So we built this rig that fit into scaffolding on the ceiling. They just plugged in with this fake body. We could puppeteer the head from above. And then the performer could, and I don't know if we used Frank Collison, he was the actor. I don't know if we used him or not. I think we did.
Okay.
He could put his arm through this hole that ended at his elbow and be able to do the same action. I mean, he had a little platform up in there that he could lay on in order to be comfortable doing that.
That's really cool.
And then Lyle's team had a bunch of tentacles that were foam latex because of weight.
Yeah.
That rotated, so they looked like they were doing stuff around him, even though it was just set dressing. Mm-hmm. And then that was all painted up with Methicil, and it's basically slime.
Yes, but apparently it's like the worst thing ever because it like gets everywhere. I did this music video with my friend Kelsey Davies. You could watch it. It's called September 10th. I wanted her to come out in this like black goopy water, and I was asking my dad. We went over the Blob as like a reference for the music video entirely, and I did use Chinese silk fabric, because we were underwater for part of it. We didn't do any veins or anything, but just like that was the right fabric to use. And then I wanted her to come out all goopy, and I asked my dad what they used, and he said Methicil, and it was like, no, because that's going to get everywhere, especially if we put black food coloring like in it. It would be a nightmare, and apparently it gets everywhere. And I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, and they and thems listening right now, that just this jelly that I have on one half of my face is so fucking annoying. I can't, my hair's stuck to everything, and I have it on my shirt, and it feels like those slap hands that are like sticky.
But it doesn't
and
go
this
away.
is just gelatin, so I can't imagine what Methicil is. Then how do you clean that up?
I think a lot of people end up throwing a lot of clothes away.
You just burn it all.
Burn everything.
When we were in the sewer set, the Blob shop had these things called Blob quilts, and
That's rad.
it was the silk fabric, and it was stitched with clear like monofilament, so that everything was clear, and it was painted with the veins, and it had some colors modeled into it. And then in all those pockets that you'd have stuffing, there's a little hole, and they would take syringes and they would inject each
That's crazy.
one with slime. And the thicker you mix it, the longer the slime stays like coagulated and thick. But if you mix it too thick, it solidifies and turns hard.
Like rock hard?
Yeah. So we were all mixing slime in these basically like trash cans with these big hand mixers.
Oh my God.
And you'd come in the next morning and you'd learn the hard way. Like 4 of them would be solid and weigh like
so
a couple
heavy.
100 pounds. But if you got it on your shoes or your clothes while you're mixing it and you washed it, the water would reactivate the slime element. So you just either rinsed your clothes out like 50 million times, or you wore trash bags and plastic suits and figured that if you got it on your real shoes, you're going to have to throw them away.
Throw them away. Those are your work shoes for the rest of the thing.
But when we did Donovan in the Blob going back, his character is in, the very first attack. He's in a rig that we sculpted in clay that was the shapes of the Blob. And then we cast that in translucent fiberglass with pinks and whites and clear in it that could support the weight of a Blob quilt. And
because you can't just put that on a person.
Yeah, and you can't just hang it over that either, we learned, because it's so heavy, it just wants to hang straight down.
Oh.
Okay, action.
Take
1. So we started taking caulking guns like bathroom caulking, like the clear stuff. And we were injecting the pockets with clear bathtub caulking and letting it set up. So then you'd have this form that had lumps to it and all that.
Oh.
And we had tailored the quilt thing to fit the shape of Donovan. So that covered him and offered thickness to this translucent material. And then we had layers of fabric that were, we had like veins and arteries, and they were different pieces of fabric. And then we had a blob piece over that. And we were pulling the red one this way and the blue one this way at the same time over his face. And then we were also pulling the clear one directly over top of him. So all this stuff was moving off of him. And he's literally, like, we had a little air tank in there, and he could lean down into the fiberglass opening where his chest was and breathe.
Okay.
And then he'd take a breath, and then he'd look up and he'd go, and he'd scream. And then we would pull all this shit over his face, and it's going up his nose and in his ears.
Oh my
and in his
God.
mouth.
What a trooper.
And it's folding his eyelids back.
Which looked pretty dope.
It was great.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't ask for more of a trooper than that. And it's like he would do it as long as he could, and then he'd just stop.
Need to go back down for air.
Yeah, but it's not like we had a ton of fabric that we were pulling either. And I think in some of those stills, you can see me holding the fabric against the waist of it so that there was a shape to it as it came up.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just draping off of his head.
That's crazy. How do you even, you're like, that's magicianism.
But it's knowing what you want to see and how you're going to frame it and then figuring out what you can do with it.
But that's just so crazy how to figure all of that out.
And then there's a puppet head of him, and we were all super into Edward Munch painting the Scream.
Yes.
With the long jaw.
Yes.
And we'd already done the long jaw on the sheriff puppet, but only so long because he was just starting to melt. He'd just been attacked. And at this point, we just wanted to show like the magnitude and the strength of the blob and what it could do. And we sculpted this really long jaw and these really angled like eye sockets. Like it was obvious his whole face was distending. And we did all that full scale.
Yeah.
After Donovan wrapped, we went in past the arm socket and shot close-ups of this puppet head, and we also had blood.
So that's a puppet head when his face is like melting.
Yeah,
that looks so cool.
And there's blood actually like squirting out into the slime.
I was gonna ask how you did that.
Eyes. Yeah, it's just under pressure.
So somebody's got a little tubey.
Yeah, I think it was like a syringe, just so we could get something that was bright red, so there was something happening to
like
his
color.
body.
Yeah, that's smart.
And then we actually, like for the miniature set, we had sculpted a piece of the blob that was super, like the mouth is like down to here, and the eyes are super drawn out long and skinny. It was like this little overlay piece that went on the miniature version. So it was supposed to be the tail end of Paul going out the window.
Oh.
But they cut out of the whole scene before it gets to that part.
I noticed that because I saw some of their like BTS footage of like, in theory, Paul goes out the window and shit. And I was like, where the fuck does this man go out the window entirely? And we don't see that. They cut it out.
That's why I have those tiny little eyeballs that are all like melting.
Yeah.
Those were from the little Paul head that was all stretched out.
Oh, cute. So. My dad kind of already went over a bit of Paul, a.k.a. Donovan Leitch, is thing through the window, but maybe we could just go play by play through the movie and we can kind of talk about what was used, because when I was going over this music video that I did earlier this year, a big two scenes that we went over was the kitchen sink one, where the guy going through that, and then the girl in the telephone booth, and I was just so shocked to find out what was actually used in certain shots, what was miniatures, and so I think that's really cool for people to see, because I had no freaking idea. There's your name.
No, I was not expecting that.
Did that feel crazy? You get your own title card?
That's great. I didn't expect it at all.
You guys shot this in Louisiana?
Abbeville, Louisiana.
I read
was the
Wikipedia.
location, but we shot a lot here.
Oh, you did?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I mean, that makes sense. So a lot of the exterior is Louisiana. I didn't realize Mom's in this first cheerleader thing. Did you know that?
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, duh, because you were there.
I wasn't there for this because we weren't.
I don't see her in this shot. She's not shaking her booty. But she is in when it cuts to Sean's character. Right. I swear. There's Mom!
Yeah.
She teleported into the scene.
Yeah, I think she only came in for 1 day, so they could tie her into the beginning so that when she died in the theater.
It would make sense.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It was.
There's Mom with her little 80s haircut. So the Can Man, I didn't realize that was his actual name. The Can Man, Can Man. That's the guy who lives in the woods.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah, and he gets it on his arm, and Lyle's crew did it attacking his arm.
Yes, and this happens in the very beginning of the movie. And the blobby thing, he pokes it with a stick in the woods in the crater. And so continue with your story. So
the Blob crew did this thing where they had this rig where the blob would travel up the stick and onto his hand.
Oh, yes.
And that was a separate standalone thing on
Did
the real
you shoot
person.
that in reverse?
Yeah, part of that was shot in reverse.
I knew it.
And then there's the end result of that, and there's the blob over his hand, and it's smooth. And I think we put some clear bladders in it so that it was moving. But we had an animatronic hand that was a skeleton hand, and we had clear human skin that was like coming apart.
Oh.
We had this great idea because there's the light of the motorcycle there.
Oh, yeah.
And he brings his hand up in front of the motorcycle, and you can see through his hand, see his bones.
That's a great idea.
See the outline of his skin, but you couldn't quite make it out, and then you had the blob over top of that.
Wait, is that what
I don't
is in
think
there?
it kind of got shot so you really see.
I don't think so
all of
either. But
But it
also,
was-
let me bring that
It
up.
was this really cool mechanism that we'd done based on the hand that we did for the half corpse for Return of the Living Dead. This shot here,
Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, we had designed it so you could see through the blob and you can't see.
Oh my God! See, this is what we mean about shooting it a certain way.
But I know we have stills of it.
Okay, and then we get to the hospital. Now, before we get to Donovan Leitch's character, Paul, the can man is at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I have footage of you guys testing this out, of the guy dissolving. What is going on here? Chemical reactions. Also, I love that this doctor guy is one of my favorite characters in Twin Peaks, and he has one of the best lines of all time.
You'd never guess. There was a fish in the percolator.
When the can man's revealed that something's going wrong with him,
Yeah, he has
that
a
was
big
something
ass...
we added last minute because originally they were just supposed to go in and he was laying there and they pulled the blanket off.
Oh, and it was all one thing.
And it was just that effect where it's steaming and
it's like,
it's all already happened. Chuck Russell, the director, said, we need some more suspense. Do you have any suggestions as to what we could do? And my suggestion
That's
was, how about we feel the blob moving, we feel the blanket moving, realize it's obviously the blob moving under the blanket towards his face, but instead of revealing the blob coming out of the blanket, it's under his skin, and his skin lifts up and it goes into his face.
Oh,
And
so that's why
then-
his eyes are white.
Yeah, and then he starts like foaming or whatever, on that reveal, so that something's happening that Paul can run away from.
Yeah,
And then when you come back to it, it's the next stage of progression,
which
and
is the
that's
dissolving.
the dissolved body, and that both of those are Billy Beck, the actor, through the tabletop, like on a lawn chair.
Oh,
basically.
poking his head through.
Yeah, he's like on a slant board.
That's
So-
nuts.
And then he's got this big foam thing. And then we had these things called calcium turnings, which is this science material that if you get it wet, it actually boils and bubbles and
oh,
puts off steam. So it looks super interactive, and it's not like you're trying to pump smoke through a material. The material itself is actually smoking. So Billy Beck's beard was trimmed on his neck, and then the prosthetic included a fake neck.
and that's
and
where it
shoulders.
connects.
Yeah,
I
and he's
see.
just underneath it. We had to make sure he was protected from the chemical reaction happening from the calcium because it got up to over 100 degrees,
That's what's happening.
which is why it's steaming,
Oh,
is because it's so hot.
Jeez,
But
you're a
it looked
scientist,
but it
dude.
looked really cool. So we're like, and
Yeah.
he was up for it.
Could you do that nowadays? Is that legal?
I have no idea.
Because
be honest.
let me tell you, shit flied in the 80s.
Like when we did the stuff in the scene prior to this where his neck's bubbling, he wore bladders on his neck and he wore a prosthetic over top of that. And then we had contact lenses for him. And we had this like sports bottle squirter thing. And it was basically just broken up Alka-Seltzer. And then when we would squirt shit in his mouth to activate it, and then he would just kind of try and gurgle it out without looking like he was working too hard.
Yeah, that's nuts. So that shot of the eyes and the neck bulge, that was a reshoot, or was that still
That was an added idea that
That
we
was-
shot.
was that tacked
May
onto the-
27th.
That was the end, towards the end of the shoot, then tacked onto the end.
Yeah, that was. They were already editing, and the
This makes
director's
sense.
like, "What can we do to
Add more
make
suspense.
more out of this?"
That's really cool, like when you don't know stuff like that, when you watch movies like this, because it's like, as a director, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, even people who direct movies that I think are phenomenal, like, they still had, as everybody does, like, had problems
Yeah.
with something and needed to amplify it.
Add drama. Basically.
Yeah. Okay, so how many days did this take you to shoot, Paul's dissolving through the window, arm rip?
I think we had a day and a half.
Oh my God, that makes me want to cry.
And that's the miniature.
This is a miniature?
Yeah, it's a full body puppet of her, full body puppet of him, thing going out the window, the wall behind them.
Oh my
and then the
God,
wall
what the fuck?
adjacent, so that you could go wide and have everything controlled. But it's literally just that, and it's
Just that?
just that shot,
Just
so
that
they
shot.
could get an establishing shot, because everything else had to be pieces because of the complexity of it. That's the
Wow.
puppet head right there.
It does look like a Scream face.
And it's getting sucked back. You can see how long the jaw is. It's
That's
just
rad.
crazy. And then
we go to the shot that my dad does not like.
the hand on the floor, it was supposed to be shot from a higher angle so that you didn't see behind the hand. Because it's Mike Smithson's hand through a fake section of floor going like this with a fake stump. And if you look at it from a little bit above, you can't see his arm going into the floor. But the angle that they shot it at and the way it's lit, you can see something's
there's a
not
crack
quite
in the
right.
floor.
Yeah. I was like, well, we'll get the best movement. It'll look the most real. And if we wanted to do like a twitch or anything with a real person, we could tell it whatever.
That's a good. I mean, did that set have to be raised anyhow?
No, it was just raised for that one shot.
Oh my god!
But it was just that one section of floor, so it was very basic.
So basic, just full on set.
And then after that, you're supposed to see the blob's tail going out the window, with the last bit of Paul's face and his mouth really screaming
cool.
really big.
Why did they cut that?
Because they went right to the drama of Siren. She passes out, and then there's the twitch. And that's moving camera. And
I guess if I was editing that, I would want to like end the scene when because we're following her through the story is like out. But still, I'd be so curious to see that shot.
I did see your dad killed Paul.